Hi, everybody. Welcome to our OSDFCon webinar series. Today, we are lucky enough to have Jessica Hyde here talking to us about Chromebook Forensics. So thank you for being here, Jessica. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Allie Devine. I'm the event manager at Basis Technology, and I'm really just here to make sure everything runs as smoothly as possible. So if you have questions anytime during the webinar, feel free to ask them throughout. To submit a question, just type it into the questions pane of the control panel. The webinar is being recorded and we're going to email out the link to everyone who registered. So look out for that if you miss anything or if it's just so great that you want to share it, please do. We scheduled the webinar for 45 minutes. After a very brief introduction from me, there's going to be a presentation followed by the Q&A session. We might go over if we get a ton of questions, but we'll definitely be finished before 1 o'clock. At the end of the webinar, a survey is going to pop up. We would love for you to fill it out and let us know your opinion. It's a brand new survey, so if you happen to join us often, we did decide to switch it up a bit, so please do that. We love that in marketing to know what you guys think. As mentioned before, I work for Basis Technology. We've been around for 25 years, and our cyber forensics team focuses on building easy-to-use software for the people who are on the front lines of cyber investigations. So we built Autopsy, which is one of the most popular open source digital forensics tools in existence. And we also make a tool for incident response called Cyber Triage, which is hyper-focused on intrusion-related investigations, and it automates as much of the process as possible. As the event manager, I feel obligated to do a quick plug for our upcoming event. As many of you have seen recently, we're pausing OSDFCon this year and we're holding an event more focused on ransomware called ResponderCon. So it's going to be an in-person event this year in Herndon, Virginia on September 13th. I'm going to post the link to that in the chat in a few minutes so you can check it out. But we'd love to see you in person there since it's been a while since we've seen everybody in the flesh. So let's get started. I want to introduce you to Jessica Hyde. Her credentials are pretty vast. So in this quick intro, I'm really barely going to touch on her experience, but in case you don't already know her, Jessica is an experienced forensic examiner who has worked in both the public and private sectors. These days, she splits her time teaching as an adjunct professor at George Mason University, and she recently founded a company called Hexordia, which does forensic services and training. And she's a Marine Corps veteran to boot. Fun fact about Jessica is back in the day when ska music was a thing, and if you don't know what ska music is, it might just be because you're too young to know what good music actually sounds like. Zing. Jessica used to play horn in a ska band called the Scaredy Cats, which I think is pretty amazing. So thank you, Jessica, for being here.
Thank you, Ollie. It's always great to see you again. And, I'm really looking forward to actually seeing you September 13 at ResponderCon. I think it's going to be a lot of fun and there's some cool speakers. So really looking forward to that. And thank you for the great introduction.
Thank you. And looking forward to seeing you in person too. It's been so long.
So let's get into it. I actually want to start off with a question. So we're going to be talking about the fact that Chrome wasn't built in a day. And this is really building on the presentation that I delivered about Chromebook in the before times in 2019 and talking about everything that's happened since, what we've learned, what's changed, what's going on with acquisitions, data you can get. So there is going to be information you may already know, but then there's going to be brand new information like problems we've ran into in the last 4 or 5 weeks and why that's affecting your ability for acquisition. So we've got a lot to cover. So I'm going to start off just with a quick poll, which is how many of you have actually encountered a Chromebook? So I'll give you just a couple of seconds to answer this question. And I see the answers coming in. It's really cool to watch it going up and down. And I already see the question of if the slides will be available after the presentation. So let's show everybody these results. So it looks like 50% of folks haven't encountered a Chromebook in their investigation and 38% have. So pretty good distribution here of folks who've had that experience and folks who haven't. So I've got one more question. This just helps me kind of understand where we should go. So this is for those of you who actually have encountered Chromebook investigations. How many of you have actually been able to successfully acquire them? So if you haven't had one before, just go ahead and hit an A. But if you've actually encountered them, wow. Okay, I'm watching these numbers tick, and that's crazy. And it's totally cool if this doesn't apply to you because you're outside the industry or you're just learning or you're just interested. That's cool too. Just wanted to get a feel. Okay, so this is really interesting. I'm going to close the poll now. So we said that 36% of folks here actually had encountered Chromebooks, and of that, only 8% have been successful. So hopefully we'll give some techniques and information today that will help you be successful. And let's just really get into it. There is a question as to if the slides will be available after the presentation. Absolutely. They're actually going to be posted on our website, Hexordia.com, and our website relaunch, brand new, beautiful, access to everything we're building is going to be next Wednesday. So they'll be posted there next Wednesday. But if anyone needs them in advance, feel free to DM me on Twitter. My handle will be at the end. Reach out to Allie. She'll have a copy at the end of the day, etc. All right. And Allie already introduced me. She mentioned my work at George Mason and Hexordia, but I just did want to mention that also was previously worked for Basis Technology. I had that privilege. So going, and that was, oh, how long ago was that, Allie? 9 to 6 years ago, so for that period. Research evolution. I mentioned that we started this research and presented it in 2019 at OSDFCon. We actually started the work. Oh no, I'm sorry. We presented it in OSDFCon in 2018. I have a note in front of me about that. So we haven't spoken about this in this arena for 4 years. And then what we really talked about was, is there data you can get on the Chromebook, or is all the data in the cloud? And we weren't really looking at acquisition methods. What we were doing is we were building Chromium VMs and seeing what data we could establish and pull out. And the answer was yes, there was valuable data that was on the device that did not exist in cloud storage, that you couldn't get back from a warrant return or cloud data. This was a slide for that presentation I gave in October 2018. And we've really moved on from that as an industry. And I couldn't have predicted in 2018 when I started this research based on some personal interest that the pandemic was going to happen and that Chromebooks were going to become very imperative because they would have a 275% growth and sell over 10 million of them in 2020 alone. This is really critical because Chromebooks just became ubiquitous, particularly with children, which made them very relevant in child sexual abuse cases. So suddenly there was a very big interest in this research, and it wound up going much further. It's important to note that you can get a Chromebook for $200. I think I bought an HP with 32 gigs of RAM really recently this month, and I paid $196 for it. I have like a Chromebook collection here. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. And you can also buy a Pixelbook for $1,700. It's basically a Google Pixel turned into a laptop format. And we'll talk a little bit about why in there. And this is really important. Again, schools. There was a giant uptick. Pre-2020, there were 90 million students using Google for education. That doesn't mean they were necessarily on Chromebooks. And that was before the 275% increase in sales of Chromebooks. And there's a note even coming from Lori Hermsdorf, who's an examiner who I love, and she's stating that community colleges, the libraries allow for checkout of these to students. So that's a really big reason there. Bad guys use these in some instances because they think that they are going undetected. And then there is a use case in the enterprise. There's single sign-on, managed networks, AD integration, printer management, and they're really allow block lists, and they're really good in terms of security because of auto updates every time you log in. So in 2019, again, pre-pandemic, there was already a growing interest, and VTO hosted a Brews and Bytes event, which I was honored to be at, along with about 20 other folks who were specifically interested in doing research into Chromebooks. And I felt really fortunate to be able to be there. And we looked at acquisition analysis, hardware analysis, and some legal stuff. And so I just wanted to share that because that was a really big event that led to the creation of images that are available publicly, and other information that we'll talk about as we go. So let's dig a little bit into data acquisition. So as I mentioned, there's really two sources, the computer and the cloud. And this is obviously a challenge for people. If only 8% of those folks who have encountered a Chromebook on an acquisition were able to get that acquisition. So if you have the Chromebook on the device, there are two types of acquisitions. There's what we'll call a decrypted logical backup of a Chromebook device. In order to obtain that, you need the username and password, hopefully of the primary account holder, because there can be multiple accounts. And if there's multiple accounts, you would need both in order to do it. The other type is if the device happens to be in dev mode, when you receive it, you can actually get a full physical image. The big caveat to this is there are two ways you can put a device in dev mode. One involves a certain key configuration on the keyboard, and one involves flipping a switch on. Prior to 2012 Chromebooks, I don't know how many of you are running into those. But if you put an existing device in developer mode, it drops the user data, period. You're going to never get the user data again because it resets the device. So that's not an option. Can you chip these off? Technically, yes, and I'll show you some physical chip offs. And then I'm going to show you the difference between what the file structure looks like on the chip offs that have been done since we first talked about this in 2018, and the challenges there. And the TLDR on that is that the data is encrypted and we can't deal with it. Then we have cloud acquisitions, and we're going to talk about the difference in the data between these types as we go. You can get data from a takeout, providing you have consent and a username and password. This is the self-archive method that is used by Google. You can use a cloud acquisition using token, username, and password, or warrant return. There additionally is an ability to do an enterprise takeout. So let's get into this Chromebook acquisition. Daniel Dickerman, who's a fantastic forensics examiner, wrote a methodology to get that decrypted logical acquisition, as well as a methodology to get a device that's already in dev mode. Again, placing a device in dev mode will wipe the device, but you don't need the password for it. So if it happens to be in that state, you're good. And Daniel's method has been peer-reviewed and exists on DFIR.pubpub.org. The tools and scripts to do it are there as well. I'm going to mention something really quickly on tooling in a little bit. So his method of acquisition is fantastic. It's not that simple. You have to obtain the correct recovery utility for your precise model. Oh, and by the way, about 6 months ago, Google took those down from public posting, so the only ones that exist are ones that are archived, which means that's automatically not going to support the newest devices that recoveries did not exist for. You need 3 drives to use the methodology: a Chromium Live USB, an encrypted partition recovery USB, and a physical cloning USB, plus an output USB. It depends on which method you're using, how you're going to be using that. And don't forget, if you've got multiple users, the owner account, whoever's the primary account, that's where you're going to get your system and decrypted backup. If you just have another user that's not the owner, you're only going to get that user's vault. In his paper, he suggests mounting the image for analysis, as at the time that he wrote this, there weren't utilities or research into how to parse that. I will be showing you that content today as to what to do with it. So again, that is the method. Now, at one point, Magnet released a tool called Magnet Chromebook Acquisition Assistant that was free. When the recovery methods were pulled by Google, which that tool utilized reaching out to it to do, and you only needed one thumb drive to use the tool, and it simplified the method, and Magnet, Jad built it, and Jad worked directly with Daniel. I was fortunate enough to be involved in some of the testing because I'd been working on Chromebooks. It was a great utility until Google took those down. There was another issue that the methodology stopped working with recoveries that were past version 90 of the recoveries, which was okay because your device could be past version 90 and use an older recovery. So you could use an older recovery to still get the acquisition. You just needed to go to archive. So at that time, Magnet came out with a Magnet Chromebook Acquisition Assistant version 2. This was actually in May. That's how recent this change was. And they had pulled the old one off of the website because it no longer was working, because it required reaching out live to that site. So basically, all of those custom recovery modules were archived, and it now became possible to use this utility, which I'm not showing you for a reason we'll get to in a minute, to go ahead and pull them. I actually showed this off in April before its release when I was doing a talk on Chromebooks. So they put it out in their beta program for people to test, and it wasn't yet released publicly. I'll get to what's happened to it now in a little bit. But right now, you would need to manually use the Daniel Dickerman method. So there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind when you use the Daniel Dickerman method. These are both issues that I've ran into as well as other folks. By the way, if you see the Chrome icon in the upper corner, we're talking specifically about Chromebook for the slide. This is just for when you guys reference this later. If you see the giant box with all of the takeout different components, that means that that slide's referring to the data you get from a takeout, because both are possible. So if you're going to do an acquisition, you need these couple of things. You need the username and password. You cannot use the Daniel Dickerman decrypted logical method, which is what this is talking about, without it. You can't enter any dots in a name. So let's say, and this is not my email, so please don't go try it. It's somebody else who probably has my similar name. Let's say my email was jessica.hyde@gmail.com. You would enter Jessica, no dot, no space, no nothing, hyde@gmail.com. Yes, you still use the dot and the .com, just not in the username. You have to verify the language of the keyboard. I know of several acquisitions, and those acquisitions were done, and people would go, I know the password, I'm typing in the right password, and it's not working. And what it was is the keyboard was in another language. When you enter the password using this methodology, you are on a screen where you cannot see the digits you're putting in. You'll just get like the little asterisks. So what I like to do is test the password in the user box as if I was logging in live, so that I can see that each character maps correctly. And if it doesn't, I can figure out the mapping of the keyboard based on the language. Again, you have to use custom recovery version 87 and below, because 88 and above are missing a required library in order for it to function. Just like mobile devices, there's not a custom recovery for every single Chromebook out there, so not all Chromebooks will work with this method. And here is the biggest thing about like a silent failure when you utilize this method. And there's not a way around it. When this method is used, the custom recovery actually uses the free space on the Chromebook to write out the data before writing it out to your drive. So let's say you have a 64 gig drive and 20 gigs of it is used, you will get a full collection. It'll be good. Yes, you're good to go. Let's say you have that same 64 gigabyte drive, but 50 of it is used. You're only going to get 14 gigs of your acquisition, and you won't know what 14 gigs, and nothing's going to tell you. So you need to look at the size of your drive, and you need to look at the size of the space left. This has nothing to do with how big your drive is that you're writing to. It has to do with how much space is left on the Chromebook. Your partial is still going to be good and valid, but we can't control what goes into the partial. Also, not all thumb drives are going to work for creating a recovery drive. Now, I mentioned that the utility doesn't work anymore, the Magnet Chromebook Acquisition Assistant, that it's back in beta for people who are part of the Idea Lab. But what I wanted to wait to tell you is that about 5 weeks ago, Google broke everything with the update to Chrome OS 100. So if the device you're looking at is pre-Chrome OS 100, you can still use the Daniel Dickerman method and it will work. You will need to get archived versions of the recovery mode. And I've been successful personally in being able to find things using archive.org. But post version 100, you'll start the process, it'll never finish, and it'll never make an acquisition. We don't know exactly what's broken yet. We don't know how to fix it yet. Obviously, the word is yet, because obviously there's been multiple evolutions on this. But that's why even if you were in the beta, that the Magnet Chromebook Acquisition Assistant 2, which was super awesome and even easier to use than the first one, was only live in beta for about a month before it got broken, because that's the volatility of acquisitions. So just so you know where it is, why that tool's gone, the Daniel Dickerman method will still work on devices prior to 100. And important to note, there is value to still having the method, because some devices can't be upgraded past version 84, some past version 88. So I've ran into different Chromebooks that come to stopping points where they no longer support upgrade of the operating system past that, but they still operate and function fine. Now, should anybody be using a book that no longer can get updates? Probably not, but it is definitely a problem. So I do see a lot of questions about if the presentation will be available. Yes, 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 the presentation will be available afterwards. We'll get it to you. So you may be asking, well, what about if we do chip off? We've taken chips off of these devices. I'm going to go through this part pretty quickly. They've been taken off of an Acer Chromebook that I know of, and the image is available. We can see this in some data. This data is not the user data. It's kind of funny because there's a form there that's called top secret that just happens to be in this user directory. This is not the user data. The user data is encrypted. It will fool you. This is what the encryption folder in the .shadow directory looks like. I just want to show you that on the Samsung 303C, which we also chipped off, it looks completely different. This was done at the Brews and Bytes event. And on the Samsung 500C, it looks completely different. If anybody wants those images because they want to try to play with them, you're welcome to it. No, we do not know the passwords. Will any of these steps work with Chrome OS Flex? I assume acquisition will be easier on a non-Chromebook PC. If you have a non-Chromebook PC and it's a Chromium OS, because it's Chrome OS when it's on a Chromebook, it's Chromium OS when it's not on a Chromebook, and it's the Chromium OS. And this is a response to Josh Meyer's question, because it's a really, really good question. You most likely, it already has dev mode on it, the ones I've ran into, so you may be able to do just a direct regular DD via Linux command line. And those instructions are also on the DFIR PubPub posting of Daniel Dickerman method. Of note, SWGDE is about to release a draft about Chromebook acquisitions for public comment. It hasn't been released yet. I'm a member of SWGDE, so I know that that's coming close unless it gets rejected. If not, it'll be up in September. But just note that that is something that's being worked on, and your comments would be great. But that method has been peer reviewed. It's solid up until this break. and it will work for Chromium OS as well, but just so you know that Chromium OS, oftentimes it's already in developer mode, in my experience when seeing it. So let's get into cloud acquisition, because there are methods for that. You can use takeout, which is a self-archive, a commercial acquisition, or some utilities that'll pull Google data from some commercial vendors. You can get a warrant return. I have the link there for those of you in law enforcement into how to do the request. And if you can get into, if you have the Google Admin Data Export tool as a Google admin on a Google Workspace account, you can do the Google Workspace takeout. So a takeout acquisition is pretty easy to do, but it's important to know what you need: consent, username and password, access to the two-factor authentication, access to the Gmail where the notification will be available. You need to know that you cannot do this covertly because a notification is going to occur. And because of that, you may want to go the warrant return route if that's available to you in your role. So when you create a takeout, there are some important things to note. By default, the access log activity on the Google Workspace account is deactivated. And in some Google Workspaces, the availability for using user credentials to do a takeout is limited. So I'm going to show you what the availability is from the admin dashboard in a minute. But you do want to turn on the access log activity because that gives you IP addresses with timestamps, which is totally valuable. So just so you know, if you are going that warrant return route, there were some legal folks, including the amazing Kathy Hansen, who worked on draft documents for a Chromebook device template, a Chromebook go by, a Google affidavit, and a Google warrant return. These were written in 2019, and if you need access to those, just message me on Twitter and I can share those out. Let's get into analysis. So we're going to go back and forth talking about the data that you get on a Chromebook versus a takeout. By the way, the TLDR on this next 15 minutes as we go into this data is, if possible, get both. So when you get this decrypted logical acquisition of a Chromebook, this is what it's going to look like. You can see here I've got two users, the Brews and Bites Betty and Brews and Bites Bob, OS boxes, and then this is the system. So these are the three users. If you get a takeout, you're going to get a zip file that looks like this. This actually is the MVS 2021 takeout. There are images available from the Magnet Summit 2021 CTF, which I helped build and create along with the Digital Forensics Association. I'll share the link to that later, but you can actually pull the copies of these takeouts in Chromebooks and go ahead and play with them. Let's get into some artifacts. So we'll start with the browser because browsers are what Google is known for. So there's going to be multiple locations where the data is. I just have these in the slides. I'm going to breeze past them. It's just so that when you pull these slides for reference, they're going to be valuable. Let me get a sip of water here, or tea. There are 94 slides in this deck, so there's a lot of content, and data can be located at multiple locations depending on the version that you're looking at, and I'll tell you what kind of storage the data is in. So this is a SQLite DB, and what you're going to get is you're going to get your web history, the things you expect, visit counts, the address that was gone to, etc. There's also a browser cache. There are also current tabs, last tabs, current sessions, last sessions. So all of those artifacts are available on the Chromebook itself. Now, when we look at the takeout, here's the icon so that you know that it's a takeout. You are going to get bookmarks, browser history, and sync settings. Here's an example of what that Chrome Web History report looks like when it's viewed in RLEAP. RLEAP is returns leap. This is part of the XLEAP project by Alexis Brignoni. There were a lot of contributors to this, and RLEAP does warrant returns. There's also a companion project called CLEAP, and that does Chrome parsing. And I'll show you that in a few slides. There's a question about if you find the Chrome OS, where you find the Chrome OS version, assuming the Chromebook is locked and don't have a password. If the Chromebook is locked and you don't have a password, you're not going to be able to determine it, and your only acquisition method is going to be to go ahead and get a takeout or a warrant return using another method. I'm going to give one other warning. Sometimes people think that they can reset, I've seen this happen, the Chromebook password by resetting the Google account password. The problem is you still have to log into it for the first time with the last password that was used, so it doesn't matter if you reset it, and you probably don't want to because you may be able to pull that password, like if you can get a image of the Android phone or from the same user, or a Google warrant return or takeout, you may be able to find their other stored passwords, and maybe you have the password for the Chromebook. The problem is if you reset the password administratively for the whole account, the current disk is encrypted with the last password. That doesn't change. So yeah, if you don't know the password, you're locked out. You need to get the password or hope that it was in dev mode. That's oh, and if you do know how to get into it, bottom right hand corner, you're going to click, you're going to then go to settings and then just about Chrome OS. So bottom right hand corner if you're not familiar with Chrome. Browser history from the takeout. What's kind of neat is you're going to get the if the link was generated in a search, or if it was physically started to be typed, or if it was a link through. So that's actually kind of some great information. And the other advantage you're going to get on a takeout is if somebody viewed an area like in Google Maps, etc., it's going to automatically give you the geolocation coordinates. So it's just going to make your investigation that much easier in knowing where they were. And this is Chromebook extensions. Extensions are really important because a lot of applications in the Chrome operating system, and let's be real, the Chrome OS and what you see in the Chrome browser are using a lot of the same techniques. So a lot of things that are applicable here are applicable to Chrome as well. And most of these browser artifacts, for example, in 2018, actually Ryan Benson, before the talk at OSDFCon, because it was the open source digital forensics conference, updated his open source tool Hindsight to parse all of these from Chromebooks and its locations. But extensions are what runs a lot of tools in the operating systems, very similar to apps. Can Chromebook run Android apps? Yes. Can Chromebook run extensions, and that's like how Chrome content is? Yes. What you're going to see when you look at that JSON is you are going to see a ID. This ID, if you go to the Google's Chromebooks Play Store and look at the things for Chromebooks, and you search any one, just replace the GUID in the bar with this GUID, and you'll see what the application is. So these are going to be logically located also in the extensions folder. Each one of these will have a folder. And if you go into that manifest JSON, that's where you're going to get all your permissions. Here's an example of one you might want to know. Hyde Pro for PC Mac is available as an extension for Chromebook. And this can be a way that somebody's storing and quote unquote encrypting data. The TLDR on that is if you go into that particular application, there's a level DB that contains the password for the folders, and the folders named Don't Look Here, and you can decrypt all the pictures. But the point is that you need to make sure you're looking for those extensions, then going to their manifest JSON to get the permissions, and then looking at its settings and the information that exists. In case you're curious what a LDB is, that's a level DB. I first started seeing these on Chromebooks in 2018, but now they're everywhere. They're all over Android devices. They're all over even Microsoft is using them for Skype. So LDBs are everywhere. You're going to see them more. It's Google's proprietary. Well, it's not proprietary. It's actually open source. So you can go to Google's GitHub and look at level DB and see the whole setting. And we'll talk more about level DBs in a little bit. because there's so much content I want to talk about that you can get off the Chromebooks. So geolocations. A lot of times you're going to get way more on an Android device, but if we're speaking specifically about a Chromebook, under the maps, you're going to get the maps that they're looked at. And what's cool is you'll get an HTML link that'll actually show you the map as they perceived it. And under my activity, you can see all of the places that they looked for directions and viewed in Google Maps. And all of these will give you Latin longs, so super valuable. There's also your places. So if they've left a review anywhere, this actually came from my personal JSON as opposed to Chromebooks we were using for other content. Of course, takeouts have way more data for geolocation on Android phones, and if you're pulling it for the whole account and they have a mobile device, you'll see that. But this is just the data isolated to a takeout of an account that only existed for testing a Chromebook. But things that that you put in if you do a review, and I did a review for a doctor, it will give you the exact Latin long and all the information based on the place you reviewed. Not that you've necessarily been there, but still geolocation information of interest. So email is going to be stored on the Chromebook in the user bin file. You'll get everything you expect. In the takeout, you're going to get an mbox, so you're going to want to process that with your favorite tool. So there's lots of tools. You'll be able to get the headings, you'll get the spam and trash, etc. So this gives you everything in your Gmail. There's no retention, right? So it's going to be forever, potentially, depending on what the retention setting is, but it's possible to be no retention. So totally valuable and can be great. You can get it just from the takeout. So that's available in both. System artifacts, differences between what you're going to get. If you want the downloads, those are only going to be on the physical Chromebook. So if they downloaded stuff, and here's that don't look here file, we're not even in that, we're in the things that they downloaded locally. So you can download and work on things locally. People make the mistake of thinking that Chromebooks don't have physical storage. They do. We talked about how big that you can get a 512 gig Pixelbook. Also remember that when you're talking about these, that a lot of these devices also have SD cards, so check the SD card slot. So in the downloads, we can actually link it to the downloads table, and that's actually going to give us the time of the download, so we can do that and see that, and we can also see the actual items in the downloads directory. And you can coordinate then your downloads table, your downloads URL chains table with your Chrome browser history and timeline that, and that's really fun. I mentioned that this particular extension created a hidden folder. So that extension has its data location still in the downloads, and if you look here, we've got some file names. Ironically, this hidden folder that then contains these thumbnails and these files, so there's a thumbnails folder and the folder of the images, is actually just the file name, the full file name, base64 encoded. So it was blatantly just looking at that. If you're familiar with base64 encoding, it looks like base64, you base64 decode it, and you'll get the names of the files. Also, this particular one was just interesting because the password was just appended to the front of the PNG once you did that, and then you could decode it. There is offline storage, not just downloads, and if you're in that offline storage, you're only going to see that on the Chromebook. That's what it looks like on disk. Here's the locations where it is. It's going to be in that Gcache folder, and you'll see those files there, but you may go, how do I know which file that is? The original file names that link to that GUID are in a Gcache v1 meta file, and so there you can save them out and look at them. There is a level DB. That meta file is a level DB, and their level DBs, like I mentioned, this is that Google format. The only like freeware tool I know to do it that's not, I'll show you some other scripts, originally was Fast NoSQL. It's horrible, don't use it. So a bunch of folks in the community created tools. There's a lot of them because people are seeing this everywhere. So Mark McKinnon, actually right after OSDFCon 2018, when I spoke about these level DBs and how horrible the FastNoSQL tool is, he actually wrote a tool for it. Alex Caitness at CCL wrote a tool for it. These are all free on GitHub. Catherine Headley, she's fantastic, and wrote one. Scalar wrote one, and then Ryan Benson took the libraries from Alex Caitness and incorporated them into Hindsight. So there's a bunch of open source tools that support this. You can also get the bash history. You can get the avatar, and then that's what you're going to get on the Chromebook. Getting back into the takeout, you can get my activity. And this is really cool because it gives you these timelines of exactly what applications were used. It's very similar to like the recent tasks kind of sort of on Android. You can get the account information of the Gmail, which you probably know this, and the given name from the profile.json. Something I love is these two access logs. So you get one that's devices, and this may give you additional devices to go and explore that are using the same account. But this is the goodie. So right here, you get the IP address, the timestamp, the region for that IP address tied with the actual application that's being used. So timelining this with your other events can be awesome. I just wanted to share some references with you with regards to this. There's a targeted location quick reference guide for both Chromebook and Takeout. I wrote these when I was with Magnet, so that's where they're written. But there are tools that are going to help you parse your Chromebook data now. There's a Western Digital 2 terabyte external hard drive for Chromebooks. Yeah, so much data can be stored. Oh my gosh. So if you thought that everything was in the cloud, in the cloud, know that it's important to consider the device. Axiom added direct support for parsing Chromebooks if you happen to have an image from the Daniel Dickerman method. And then open source, Mark McKinnon, amazing, turned around to the XLEAP project, Alexis Brignoni's project, which, by the way, that whole project is nominated for a Forensic Forecast Award. Voting's open for 4 more days. I absolutely voted for Alexis Brignoni for this XLEAP project. It's amazing how many community contributors are to it. And there's CLEAP and RLEAP, which are relevant to this talk today, but there's also ALEAP for Android, iLEAP for iOS, etc. Please check it out. Check out the project, vote if you'd like. And Alexis Brignoni was my vote for Investigator of the Year. Just amazing what he's contributed back to the community. So check out the CLEAP tool, super easy to use. There is a GUI, or you can use it on the command line, and it's going to give you a report like this, and you can see your history, your cookies, your downloads, the shell commands, shell artifacts. There's so many great artifacts in here. This is what it looks like, the report that you're going to get in Axiom. This is actually that same CTF image, so you can play with it. And so I really want you all to take the opportunity to play with these images. So the 2021 CTF images that were about Chromebook, that had a Chromebook and a takeout of just that Chromebook. So these are from last year. CFREDS just hosted them. Talk about something that just happened recently in the last 4 weeks. That data was downloaded up, so now it is completely public and available. So if you want to play with the images and learn some stuff, you can go ahead and actually go through the questions. There are 2 fantastic examiners who shared their write-ups of their solves to the questions about the Chromebook. Blue Monkey Forensics, fantastic examiner who did these incredible videos, does most of it on the command line, these great YouTube videos of how to solve all the questions. But if you want to read the questions and try to solve them yourself and then see some other write-ups, Stark Forensics, which is Kevin Pagano's site. By the way, he has an incredible Start Me page that has links for everything, including Chromebook Forensics. So if you want someplace to go, check that out. That actually is nominated for Resource of the Year. But his write-up is fantabulous and will walk you through all of those questions. And then likewise, that takeout that accompanies it also had questions. And again, Blue Monkey Forensics did an incredible walkthrough. And Kevin Pagano, Stark Forensics, did a great write-up where you can read those questions and try them. And with that, I am exactly on time, Allie. I told you I'm good like that. It's 12:45. And I will happily share these slides. This talk has been recorded and will be shared back to all of you very, very quickly by Basis. Thank you, Basis, for hosting this talk and for doing ResponderCon. We're super excited. And next week, it'll be on our website, Hexordia.com, on Wednesday when we do our launch. Check out my Twitter. Everything will be posted there. Everything goes on Twitter.
Cool. Thank you, Jessica. But do you want to try to open it up for any other questions in
I would
case?
love any other questions. I've been answering all the ones that were asked in real time. So if anybody has questions, please go ahead and drop them in.
Yeah, definitely drop them in now. And then, I'd say we could stay 5 to maybe 10 minutes over, depending on
Absolutely.
if we get any questions. But I'll just stall here for like a minute or so.
Do you have anything else you want to share about ResponderCon while we're waiting?
It's an all-star lineup. We've got Brian Carrier speaking, obviously, Ryan Chapman, Brian Moran. I wasn't prepared to do a spiel.
Aaron Sparling speaking. I love Aaron. I'm going, so I was looking. I actually just registered this morning, so I was looking at the schedule just this morning. There's 2 workshops, one from Ali Hadi and one from the Basis team on cyber triage. So there's lots of great content. So if anybody has any other questions, please be sure to drop them here. Our ResponderCon talk's going to be available to the public later. That's for you, Ali.
That is for me. We will be recording at least the ones in the general session. We weren't originally going to do 2 tracks, but we got a lot of responses. So we ended up creating a second track. I don't know if the second track talks will be recorded. And then the ones that are recorded will be later announced. We're not going to be doing a live stream though, as we did with the virtual events in the past. So the short answer is yes, some of them, and also as long as the speaker approves it, because sometimes they say, no, I don't want to do that. So I'm still waiting to see who's going to make theirs public and who's not. So some of them, yes, some of them probably not.
Excellent, excellent. People seem excited about that in the Q&A.
Excellent. All right. Well, if nobody has questions, because you were very efficient and answered it throughout, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us. I definitely hope you learned something useful. I'm sure you did, because Jessica's amazing. If you have any additional questions, and you know what, I'm going to just post this in the chat, her Twitter. So you can copy and paste, because I sometimes like to do that. So feel free to follow up with her if you have questions. I'll probably also include that in the email that is going out later today with the recording, so you'll be able to check back if you need to. And that's it. So, and also last thing to close this out, just one more plug for the survey. Please let us know your opinion of today's webinar, and that way we'll know what you're interested about hearing in the future. So thanks again, everybody, and we hope to see you again wherever.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.